This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. There's nothing sweeter than baking cookies during the holidays. With Prime, I get all my ingredients delivered right to my door, fast and free, no last-minute store trips needed. And of course, I blast my favorite holiday playlist on Amazon Music. It's the ultimate soundtrack for creating unforgettable memories. From streaming to shopping, it's on Prime. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to get more out of whatever you're into.
Hey, it's Austin James. If you're like me, trying to live your best life while living with diabetes, you can relate to worrying if you're doing a good job managing your diabetes. I use the Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor to get real-time glucose readings and see the impact of every meal and activity to make better decisions. The Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor can help me live life with diabetes on my own terms, and it gives me more time for the things I love, like being a dad and a musician. Now this is progress. Learn more at freestylelibre.us.
For prescription only. Safety info found at freestylelibre.us.
Hello and welcome to Heroes and Humans of Football. My name is Mehreen Khan.
And I'm Simon Cooper. This is the football show where we take the hero and we show you the human.
From Johan Cruyff to Megan Rapinoe.
And from George Best to Kylian Mbappe.
This is the Human Football Podcast. Last week's episode was on Ruben Amorim, Manchester United's new millennial coach who's in a rush to get to the top of football management. If you haven't already, be sure to check it out.
Hello and welcome to Heroes and Humans. And today we bring you possibly the biggest conspiracy theory in football history. What happened to Ronaldo, Brazil's best player, Ronaldo Fenômeno, not Cristiano Ronaldo, on the day of the World Cup final 1998? Did somebody nobble him so that he walked around the field like a zombie and Brazil lost the final 3-0 to France? Now let me take you back to July the 12th, 1998. I was only 28 years old, practically a child. I was covering the World Cup, and to my amazement, I was accredited for my first ever World Cup final. France-Brazil, Stade de France in Paris. And a few of us newbie journalists sat in the press box photographing each other before the game because the word selfie did not even exist.
Well, what did you use to photograph yourself?
Well, I suppose we had actual cameras.
Whoa.
Because you couldn't photograph on your phones. Actually, I got a mobile phone for the first time in my life for the World Cup 1998. I remember how proud I was. The Financial Times issued me with one.
Were you playing Snake at half-time?
There were, if there were video games,
know what that is.
Any games, I was not able to use them. I was so proud that I could just call on the phone.
But there is a conspiracy theory about what happens to the phone signal. We'll come back to that.
Okay, well, it's a game of conspiracy theories, and it starts an hour before kickoff. Because we're sitting in the press stand and volunteers are arriving to hand out the team sheets as per usual. And we take our team sheets. And then there's this kind of collective shout of shock because Ronaldo, the best player on earth, the 21-year-old Ronaldo Fenômeno, Brazil's great striker, is not on the team list. Instead, they have O Animal Edmundo, he was known as the Animal, playing in his place. And everyone's like, what's going on? How can they not play their best player? And then a few minutes later, it gets even weirder because volunteers come back with new team sheets. And on the new team sheet, Ronaldo is playing. And a friend of mine remembers that the first set of team sheets were then taken away from us, presumably to be burned, destroying the evidence. Weirder and weirder. Brazil's team do not warm up on the field before the game. We first see them when they come out of the tunnel, hand in hand, as was the Brazilian thing at the time, for the anthems. So the game kicks off. And it becomes clear that, in fact, the first team sheet was right. Although Ronaldo is out there on the field wearing the number 9 shirt, he's not really playing. He's just wandering around the field like a sleepwalker. He barely touches the ball. Zinedine Zidane scores those 2 headers for France. They win 3-0, and it's Brazil's worst defeat in 68 years of World Cups. So what happened to Ronaldo? Mehreen, what were you doing that day?
So you were practically a child. I was actually a child. So the World Cup 1998 was the first ever World Cup final that I'll ever watch. So it was on TV. This World Cup did start my enduring affection for the French national team because of Zidane. and that match. And I just remember it being a bit of a mess. So when you're watching on television, this is before the days of social media, the commentators all sounded kind of befuddled by the fact that there's been a change in the team sheet and Ronaldo's not playing and then he's playing. But there's no explanations given. The pundits are sort of just pretending that everything else is fine. Then, as you say, they don't warm up on the field. So there's an air of weirdness about it. But as somebody just watching, you don't have recourse to any information, right? I can't go on Twitter, search Ronaldo hashtag and work out what people are saying.
Nor do the commentators know what's going on.
Nobody knows what's going on. And I've watched it back now, and John Champion, who's the BBC commentator, when the anthems are being played and the camera zooms in on this slightly, as you said, sort of, he's almost had a glazed look about him, Ronaldo, which you could have in a normal circumstance just said he's nervous. He's a young kid. This is the biggest game of his life. Yeah, sure, he's looking a bit nervous. But now, in retrospect, we're all thinking that something crazy is happening. And John Champion, I think the words he uses is that there are outlandish stories continuing to circulate over the health and fitness of Ronaldo. So this episode is, I guess, Heroes and Humans doing a bit of sort of true crime, are sort of leaning into the sort of mystery element of one of the biggest conspiracy theories around one of the biggest football matches in the world. But now that I look back, this seems like such an extraordinary event. But I do remember at the time, as a kid, it wasn't that weird for me that there would be a scandal around a World Cup final, because in the 90s, I was interested in two other things. One was WWE, so World Wrestling Entertainment.
It figures, yeah.
Which was fake. And the other one was that I was a Pakistani cricket fan, which was real, but I often thought was fake. So a year after the 98 World Cup final, one of the worst things that ever happens in my life is the Cricket World Cup final in 1999, which Pakistan get battered in by Australia. And of course, like most Pakistani cricket fans, I'm convinced that we threw the game. It's the only way that I could get through the pain because we were so abjectly bad. In hindsight, match fixing cricket, there was a lot of scandals going on in the 90s.
It probably was. I'm not saying anything whether it was fixed or not.
It was never decisively proved. Let's be honest, Pakistan have been guilty of other types of match fixing, which they've got caught for. That wasn't associated with the 98 final. And then with wrestling, which was becoming a super, super hyper-dominant sport in that era. So this is when The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin are coming around. I think wrestling's real, but actually it's fake. So the idea that there was a faked or staged World Cup final is just not that odd to me as a kid, because I kind of think all sport is sort of fake. But with the fullness of time, we've come to realize that maybe football is a little bit more exempt from these trends, or maybe not. We'll find out in this episode.
Maybe not. I mean, Brazilian football fans react a lot like Pakistani cricket fans, and they think it must have been fixed. That's the only way we could have lost. And in Brazil, his sort of appearance but absence in the game gets treated as a detective story. It's like the Brazilian version of the JFK assassination. And Brazilians have been digging into what happened to Ronaldo almost ever since. And that game has spawned countless conspiracy theories, many of them involving the world's biggest global sportswear brand, the sponsor of both the Brazilian team and of Ronaldo himself. So what really happened that day in Paris? Who did it? Who nobbled Ronaldo or sent this zombie onto the field? Was it, as many Brazilians think, the world's biggest sportswear brand? Or was it a secret medical condition, something that Ronaldo has never wanted to reveal? Or was he given that day a medical treatment that went wrong and had to be kept quiet to protect the doctors? There are many weird conspiracy theories. So who is Ronaldo? And what really happened that day in Paris?
Simon, let's do some stats.
We usually start with the person's date of birth, but in Ronaldo's case, it's actually disputed. His birth certificate says he was born on September the 22nd, 1976. That's wrong. He was born September 18th. The thing is that his dad only went in to declare the birth 4 days late. And if you say on the 22nd, well, he was born on the 18th, you have to pay the late fine. So Ronaldo's dad cunningly said he was only just born today, on the 22nd. So the man's birth certificate is actually wrong.
This is why you should never get men to do basic administrative tasks, 101. Some other stats. When he arrives at the World Cup in 1998, Ronaldo is considered to be the best player in the world. The year before, he's won the Ballon d'Or in 1997. And despite losing that World Cup final against France, 4 years later, he'll redeem that team and himself by winning the World Cup in Japan and South Korea. He then gets another Ballon d'Or in 2002, and it feels like the record has been righted on Ronaldo's history. But his career is actually cut short. He goes through painful knee injuries, which means that he leaves the game early, particularly by modern standards where players are playing well into into their 30s. In the current day, Ronaldo is the club president and a big shareholder of Valladolid. Generally, he's not seen or talked about much. He seems to have disappeared from view, despite being an absolute cult icon for so many football fans who grew up in the 90s and early 2000s.
Now, in telling this story, we're going to draw on our own memories of Ronaldo, but I also want to mention 3 excellent books that we've used. The first is a really astonishing Dutch book that's published in 1995 when Ronaldo is just 18. And it's a book called Ronaldo komt uit Rio, which means Ronaldo is from Rio, by a Dutch journalist called Frans Oosterwijk. Because when Ronaldo comes to Holland to play for PSV Eindhoven in 1994, aged only 17, Oosterwijk thinks, hey, this is going to be interesting. And he practically moves in with a 17-year-old and his mum and his girlfriend in a small house in Eindhoven for a year.
That's not sus at all. But it paid off big time.
It was a brilliant decision. And Ronaldo komt uit Rio, the book, is now a fantastic historical document. There are 2 later good books, Futebol, The Brazilian Way of Life by Alex Bellos, many of you will know, and Shocking Brazil, 6 Games That Shook the World Cup by the Brazilian Fernando Duarte.
Simon, you've hinted at his disputed birthday already. Tell us some other things about his very early life in Rio.
Well, the birth is quite interesting. So Oosterwijk has the big reveal. Do you know who Ronaldo was named after? Ronaldo's father asks Oosterwijk. And the father says he's named after the doctor who closed off his mother's tubes after the birth. Ha ha, Dr. Ronaldo, his name was. So Dr. Ronaldo lives on in history.
Wow.
Now, if we use the official birth certificate, September 22nd, 1976, Ronaldo is born in the most fertile week in football history. A few days later, Michael Ballack is born in Görlitz in the German Democratic Republic. Then Francesco Totti follows immediately in Rome, September 27th. And on September 29th, Andriy Shevchenko comes to earth in the Ukrainian village of Verkivshnaya. So all of them, according to Ronaldo's birth certificate, are born within a single week. He grows up, Ronaldo, in a 1-bedroom house. They have a house on the ground of his grandfather's small house in a working-class neighborhood on the edge of Rio. They're very poor, and until Ronaldo is a teenager, he shares a sofa bed with his brother Nelio. And Fernando Duarte writes, he's a very shy kid, he has low self-esteem, he's afraid of the dark, he doesn't speak until he's 4, he sometimes wets the bed, and he sleepwalks. And that fact may possibly become relevant again on that day of the 98 World Cup final. So do bear sleepwalking in mind, okay? He has terrible buck teeth. Like many people in poor countries, he's plagued by his teeth, and of course there's no money to fix them. He looks very odd, and so at parties when he's a teenager, girls are never interested in him. And so the first thing he does when he later makes money was to get braces to fix his teeth and also to make up for the shortage of girls in his teenage years.
That's exactly what Cristiano will do as well. Fix his teeth the first time he gets a paycheck.
I think Cristiano looks a bit better as a teenager.
Not the teeth, though, I'll be honest. The other one that comes to mind is Garnacho, who does exactly the same. Garnacho's glow up is crazy.
He starts out playing futsal, indoor football, because futsal in much of Brazil is more popular than football itself. But, he's good enough that at 13 he goes to a trial at Flamengo, the club he supports. He gets through the first selection. But then he says to the club, look, if you want me to come back for the second selection, can you pay my bus fare? And they say, no, go away. And on the way home from the trial, he's mugged by street kids. So he gives up on Flamengo. And instead, he joins this tiny club called São Cristóvão. And they discover the kid has no tactical sense. I mean, no wonder, because he's never really played football. He's just played futsal. He doesn't like training, doesn't like defending. He doesn't listen to the coach, and he doesn't head the ball. But he's still pretty good at scoring goals.
But while he's still a promising young teenager, his father, the guy who turned up a bit too late to sign his birth certificate correctly, makes another big decision on Ronaldo's behalf. Simon, tell us what it is. And again, this is something, the commercialization of Ronaldo and his image, which is going to become super important later on. But where does it begin at the age of 15?
Yeah, so if you're a poor kid with this brilliant gift, then everyone wants to get their claws into you and exploit you. So his dad signs a contract with 2 clever young agents, Alexandre Martins and Reinaldo Pitta, and these 2 essentially buy ownership rights. They buy shares in Ronaldo. They buy his image rights, and they even buy the right to decide which club to join. And Jorge Caldeira, who's an expert on Brazilian colonial history, who also wrote a biography of Ronaldo, says this contract that they signed with him looks a lot like some servitude deals from Brazil's slavery era. So, he is being sold for his muscle power and his physical capacities. But it has to be said that these agents are really they're smart guys. They take good care of him. They move the family into a better house. And then they bring him to Cruzeiro, which is really the start of his pro career. And this teenage kid just starts scoring loads and loads of goals. Now, everyone can see when Ronaldo's just 16, 17, this guy is brilliant. His technique, his feints, he has a cracking shot. He's, straight at goal. He's incredibly efficient, especially for a teenager. And he's also faster and stronger than anyone else. So if you look at video of him in the mid-90s, he looks like a muscle footballer of today. He's built like a footballer of the 2020s, but he's playing against these kind of stick-thin opponents of the 90s. So he's like a cross between RoboCop and, Leo Messi. He's always like Erling Haaland with a better touch.
Except the muscle doesn't last as long.
Now, in his first 50 professional games, he scores 49 goals. And that's better than young Pelé's average. And so Brazil are getting ready to go to the World Cup in the US in 1994. And he's only 17, but he debuts for Brazil because everyone in Brazil is saying, oh, well, Pelé won the World Cup at 17. And so Brazil's coach, Carlos Alberto Pereira, thinks, well, I better take Ronaldo along because otherwise everyone's going to shout at me, and, especially if we screw up. So he goes to the World Cup in the US, but he doesn't play a minute there. And meanwhile, he signs a deal with Nike, and this is going to become important later, for what's then a massive $150,000 a year. Brazil win the World Cup in 94. That final, very boring final, goes to penalties against Italy. Romario's their star, and 17-year-old Ronaldo just sits on the bench during the final, and people say he's shaking with nerves for fear that he'll be sent on.
Shaking with nerves before a big final.
Yeah, interesting.
It's a slight foreshadowing. But then Ronaldo ends up in your adopted homeland, Simon, which is pretty lucky for you. So do you remember seeing a young Ronaldo at PSV, and how the hell does he end up in Eindhoven of all places?
Yeah, Eindhoven is not the most glamorous place. I mean, it's a provincial town in a provincial country. Eindhoven is not beautiful. It's best known also as the kind of company town of the Philips company, which Philips is no longer a thing. Now, PSV are not the biggest club in Holland, but they're the canniest club. And before Ronaldo, they got Romario, as Romario made PSV his first stop in Europe. Now, Romario did not like Eindhoven except for the tall blonde women. He didn't like the cold weather. He didn't like the fact that it was a long way to fly to Carnival in Rio, but he went anyway. But Romario was brilliant at PSV for about 5 years. He just left when, in 94, he's gone to Barcelona, and PSV needed another Brazilian. So during the World Cup, Carlos Alberto Pereira, the coach, lets Ronaldo out of the Brazil camp, and he goes with yet another agent, a different guy, Giovanni Branchini, because everyone wants a piece of Ronaldo. He goes to meet a delegation from PSV Eindhoven in a hotel in San Francisco. And they sit down at a table, and the PSV guys say to Ronaldo, we will give you a regular starting spot. And then Branchini, the agent, repeats what Romario had said. Romario said, PSV is the perfect place from where you can make the leap to the world's biggest league, Italy. And Ronaldo thinks, okay, if Romario says it. So he arrives in Eindhoven, and they put him out with his mother Sonia and his girlfriend Nadia. Nadia will be the first of many blonde Ronaldo girlfriends, and they'll acquire the collective nickname, the Ronaldos. And they live in a house on a street called Groot Paradijs, Great Paradise. They're at number 1 Groot Paradijs, and PSV have learned a lot from Romario. They tried to discipline Romario, didn't work. He always went to Carnival in Rio. He never gave 100% in training. He didn't even give 20% in training. He didn't go to the compulsory team meal after training. He never defended, but he did score loads of goals. So PSV decided, okay, the 17-year-old, we'll just kind of let him do what he wants. We're not going to ask him to track back. We're not even going to ask that he shows up on time, which in the Netherlands is the kind of alternative for religion.
Yeah, can't you get stoned for that kind of stuff if you've turned up late? I once was late to a meeting with a Dutch person by 2 minutes, and they'd already left by the time I got there because they couldn't be bothered to wait.
Yeah, serves you right.
But is Ronaldo actually just like a clone of Romario, or are we just stereotyping him as a Brazilian in the Netherlands who just wants to have fun?
Well, he's very different, both as a player and as a person. I mean, he's very impressed by Romario. So when he scores his first goal in his first match for PSV, he's only 17. Romario calls him on his mobile, and he comes into the club the next day and he says, Romario called me. And he's so proud. He's got this phone call from, the world's number 1 striker. And so what we're seeing really is chain migration. That's how it works. The first migrant recommends the place to people back home, sets them up with a network there. And so, they come and they're able to land and make a start. But no, he's not like Romario, because Romario, was the ultimate party goer. Ronaldo says, I rarely go to Copacabana. I don't belong to a carnival club. I can't dance samba. And what I like most is being at home. What more could PSV want? Everyone can see, though, that he's brilliant. So Philippe Cocu, a wonderful player, was then at PSV. He told me that one day after training, a few of the players are practicing levandos. Do you know what a levando is?
No, I don't actually.
So a levando is a thing among footballers. You blast this rising shot that looks like it's soaring over the bar, and then it suddenly dips under the crossbar. Now, obviously, this is really, really hard to do. And a really good footballer might manage one levando in 10 attempts. So these players are trying to hit levandos. And Ronaldo sees them practicing and says, what are you doing? And he says, I'll have a go. He hits 9 shots. 7 are levandos that go in. And then he laughs, you guys keep practicing. I'm going in and going home.
Nice. So the young Ronaldo, who is in unlikely place, Eindhoven, is doing well on the pitch. He seems to have integrated very well with his teammates, despite not speaking Dutch or English. He's following the path of some other Brazilian greats. I mean, does anything go wrong? What does Ustavic say in his biography about how he handles life outside of the club?
Well, he's a very level-headed kid. He's not pretentious. He spends a lot of time watching TV. And at some point, some journalist compares him to Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. And this is put to Ronaldo, and Ronaldo says, who are they? He has no general knowledge. It doesn't bother him at all. He's a very easygoing guy. He laughs easily. He doesn't fight with teammates. He doesn't defend, but they let it go.
It's giving me Cole Palmer vibes.
I think he's much more charismatic and extrovert and kind of sociable than Cole Palmer strikes me as, don't you think?
I would say Cole Palmer is very sociable, but we are probably comparing apples and pears because I guess Ronaldo's hinterland is very much in Brazilian culture and South America, whereas I think Cole Palmer still doesn't know where Michelangelo or Leo da Vinci is, even though they're a bit close to home.
So what Ronaldo really likes doing is, he's been this poor kid for 15 years, and now suddenly he's rich. And so what he loves doing is buying clothes. So he and Nadia will change outfits several times a day. And the other thing he really likes, after being the ugly adolescent with buck teeth, is that now he has sex on tap. So he's very excited to have the first of these look-alike blonde girlfriends that he'll assemble. And he and Nadia are constantly disappearing upstairs. A couple of the Ronaldos will actually make money posing in lesbian clinchers in Brazilian Playboy.
So while he's out in the provinces of the Netherlands, I guess Brazilians realised there was this kid who's sitting on the bench for the 1994 World Cup final. He never makes it, but he's a super promising talent. So does his stint in the Netherlands actually raise his profile back home in Brazil?
Well, Brazilians at this stage, my sense is, still think that Brazil is obviously the best league in the world and the best footballers, and what people do in Europe is not of great interest. So he's gone to this country that is not Italy, but it's somewhere in Europe. Oh yes, that country that we sometimes play in World Cups. And so nobody really cares much about him scoring lots of goals at PSV Eindhoven. So he first crosses Brazilian consciousness again when he actually plays a tournament for Brazil, the 96 Olympics. But it's not a brilliant success. Brazil are knocked out in the semis. And the main thing people remember about Ronaldo in that tournament is that he is filmed urinating on the field during a game against Hungary.
Oh God, he did a Paula Radcliffe. That's terrible.
Well, he does it on purpose. It is not a kind of accidental moment.
He urinates on the pitch on purpose because what? Because he disrespects Hungary?
No. He felt he needed to urinate, so he.
Because that's because men urinate wherever they want. That's literally the definition of privilege. They just whip it out and piss wherever they want.
I've not seen many men urinate on the field during a football game.
Maybe we haven't been looking hard enough. It's probably good for the grass.
He is snapped up by Barcelona after 2 years at PSV Eindhoven in 1996. Now, Barcelona's manager is Bobby Robson. So, as you can imagine, they're not a very refined tactical team. So their tactical system seems to be just keep 10 men behind the ball, bang it forward, and then Ronaldo will score by himself. And it works. Plays one season at Barça, he scores 47 in 51 games, even though he's simultaneously going out with the actress and model Susana Werner, who's a Brazilian who lives in Rio. And so he keeps having to pop across the Atlantic to see her, which must be tiring. It doesn't stop him. He's unstoppable at this time. He wins the Copa America in 97, wins the Ballon d'Or that year, age 21. And everyone can see this man is going to stack up Ballon d'Or. He's going to go on and dominate football for a decade. And Nike, very excited, raised his contract to what's said to be $200 million total over his career.
Wow. So Nike can already see that they've got a star on their hands. And it's not just Ronaldo that they want to get their claws into. It's also the Brazilian team as a whole. What happened, Simon?
Yeah, they sign a contract with the corrupt Brazilian Football Federation, the CBF, to become kit sponsor of the national team. And the deal is that Nike will pay the CBF something like $160 million over a decade. But at this point, nobody knows exactly what's in the contracts because obviously the CBF, who like to keep their own claws on the money, keep the contract secret. But lots of Brazilians start saying, well, look, our national treasure, this team, is being sold to this giant American corporation. And later, the contents of this Nike contract will actually leak out and mix with the story of Ronaldo's disastrous World Cup final.
So if you guys listened to our episode on Blatter, you'd realise that maybe FIFA's corruption was endemic throughout all of its national constituent bodies. But what is the Brazilian version of this corruption? How are they being rapacious on the Brazilian football team?
Well, the head of the CBF, the guy who signs that Nike contract and then seems to have made a lot of the money from it disappear, including by giving himself a pay rise of more than 300%, is Ricardo Teixeira. Now, Teixeira, for decades until he got divorced, was the son-in-law of the longtime FIFA president, João Havelange. And both he and Havelange are, I think we can say this legally, famously corrupt. So in 2012, a Swiss prosecutor reveals that the pair of them took $41 million in bribes in connection with World Cup marketing rights. When this comes out, so this is years after the whole Nike stuff, Teixeira flees Brazil to Miami for, quote, health reasons, and then stays there. So the facts of Teixeira's antics will come out later, but already in 1998, most Brazilians know what kind of fish he is. And so the fact that he and Nike are in bed together, it kind of doesn't smell right, even at the time when the contract is signed. Also because he refuses to say what's in the contract. He feels it's none of people's business what deal the National Federation has done because he kind of owns the National Federation.
While all these commercial shenanigans are going on, Ronaldo's at the top of the world. He's won the Ballon d'Or. He's doing it on the big stage, Barcelona, somewhere where people are going to be paying attention. But then suddenly he decides that it's not going to be Barcelona for him. He quits them and ends up at Inter Milan for what will be a world record transfer fee of $27 million. Why does he do it? Has it got anything to do with Nike?
Well, it's not clear, and it wasn't clear to Barça. So I wrote this book, Barça, where I deal with this episode as well. And it's one of the many funny episodes of what you could call incompetence. And so Barça in 97, Ronaldo's their best player, and they're going to give him a big new contract. And they show him this huge new contract, and Ronaldo and his agent seem to like it. So Barca's directors say, guys, let's all go to a restaurant and we'll celebrate the renewal of your contract. And when we get home from lunch, back to the club, we'll sign the contract. So they go out and they have this lovely long Catalan lunch. I don't know if you've experienced long Catalan lunches.
I haven't, sadly. I don't really eat lunch.
Well, I would recommend. So at the end of lunch, which, in Barcelona is probably like 6 o'clock, they all go back to the club very merry because they're going to sign the contract. Ronaldo's going to renew. But by the time they get back to the Camp Nou and the offices to sign it, it's too late. Ronaldo's agents have already sold him to Inter Milan.
Wow.
Yeah. Unclear why, but it's a brilliant story.
I mean, don't have lunch, people. Maybe it just slows you down. I mean, we mentioned a little bit earlier that he wants to end up in Italy. That's kind of why he's in the Netherlands. So is it just the case that he wants to be in the best league in the world, what he thinks is the best league in the world, Serie A? It
was then, but who knows what he wants? Because at this stage of his career, really everybody, Nike, his agents, the CBF, his clubs, everybody is just taking a piece of him. And so his career at 21 is his clubs are playing him too much, defenders are kicking him, sponsors are overusing him. Now we get to the big moment. It's summer 1998. 21-year-old Ronaldo is given his biggest assignment yet. Go to France, kid, and win Brazil the World Cup. Easy.
So let's get into the tournament. It's going to be my first World Cup. I'm pretty excited. And we said it's a big job. Go and win the World Cup. But let's be honest, everyone thinks Brazil are going to win the World Cup. Yeah. They won the World Cup in 1994. They're clearly favourites to win the World Cup. Sure, maybe France, maybe some other teams. Of course, the English think they can do it. But nobody's really looking past Brazil.
Yeah, I mean, France, let's face it, they'd never done anything in World Cups. They'd played some pretty football, their hosts, but yeah, hardly anyone thinks France are going to do it. Certainly not French people.
Were you in France at this time, Simon, or are you back still in London?
I was still at the Financial Times. I was writing the currency column as my day job, so it was an enormous joy and relief to go to France for the World Cup. And in fact, going around France eating lunch partly persuades me very soon afterwards to move to France.
Your lunch is quite a big deal for you. I didn't realise.
Yeah, it's the central point of my life.
Interesting. Currencies were quite important in the late 90s, but I guess not as important as football. Huh?
Yeah, I feel a lot of kinship with Ronaldo because we like football and we like lunch.
Yeah, you guys are soulmates. They go into the World Cup, they've got two very good strikers, Romario and Ronaldo, Eindhoven alumni. But just before the tournament, there's another scandal, one that we forget, which is that Romario doesn't make it to France. He's sent home before the tournament kicks off with a thigh injury and insists that actually he's fit to play. This is a weird story we're going to hear a bit later on with Ronaldo. Simon, I guess you were covering this much closer than I was at the time. What was it like to watch Romario being booted out and then begging to come back into the squad?
Yeah, so this guy had been the star of the 94 World Cup. In 98, he's a bit old, but this guy's an incredible goal scorer. And it's very weird to send somebody home while he's saying, no, I'm fine, guys, I'm fine. And he gives this tearful press conference, and this point is the biggest story in the sports world. And he says, I will recover very quickly, and I will be back in training with my club Flamengo while the World Cup is still on, so that will serve you right, CBF.
Ooh.
So Brazil start the World Cup in an atmosphere of controversy. And Fernando Duarte writes there's even more when just before the World Cup kicks off, the Seleção, the Brazilian team, their training session is broken off early so that the players can go to a Nike reception in Paris. Now, Brazilian fans feel this is disgraceful. Our great national team, which is obviously still the best in the world and is going to win every World Cup, has become just a Nike advertising prop. And even some players complain. They say, look, this is a bit of distraction preparing for the World Cup. And you, as an economics editor, will know that this fits into broader worries that Brazilians and others have about, globalization and rapacious corporations and so on.
Indeed. I mean, I know you said that you found currencies quite boring, but in the late 90s, we had massive financial crises in the developing world, in Latin America and in Southeast Asia, because they were suffering a lot from the heady days of globalization. So I think that is a real feeling. I'm also I'm really struck by the fact that this is all happening in Paris because, 20 years later, the Paris team, PSG, are basically just a sort of fashion wing of Nike.
Harsh.
I mean, it's true. There's PSG shops everywhere. I mean, there's one on Oxford Street. It's completely empty, but they're just sort of like a holding brand for Nike and Jordan. So it doesn't surprise me so much that this was happening even back in the day, and Paris was the home of this quite uncomfortable fashion and commercialization of football brands. I think a fitting scene for this controversy to be playing out, I think.
Harsh. And my children would vehemently disagree with your vicious slandering of Paris Saint-Germain, but we'll leave it at that.
All while wearing their €80 PSG jerseys that look like they could have come off Paris Fashion Week. Haha.
Gotcha. Okay, so the World Cup kicks off. Opening match is Brazil against the almighty Scotland.
I remember this so much because I was kind of supporting Scotland because I needed a sort of British team because I couldn't support England. And Scotland were actually pretty good.
Yeah, they were. This was before they became terrible and then they became mediocre again. But Brazil beat Scotland 2-1. Big triumph. Ronaldo does not score, and a couple of days later, he's filmed getting onto the team bus with an ice pack strapped to his knee. So this is, there is national panic. They beat Morocco, and then they lose their last group match to Norway, which is not a good look, right? And Ronaldo has only scored once in 3 group games. And to make things worse, Romario, as he'd promised, is being filmed training completely normally with Flamengo, with the knockout matches of the World Cup still to start. So this is a big humiliation for Brazil's doctors, but life for them is going to get much, much worse.
Unremarkable group stages. Ronaldo scores a goal. They beat a couple of minnows. They don't beat Norway. How do they turn it around in the knockout stages?
Well, first they hammer Chile. They win 4-1. Ronaldo scores twice. This may actually, with hindsight, be their biggest triumph. But it's at this point that Brazil's doctor, Lilio Toledo, who's a guy who we will encounter subsequently, decides to tell the world's media that Ronaldo is fat. This is correct, but is this the moment to say this? Toledo says Ronaldo's problem is that he is slower because of an excess of weight. He looks a bit tubby.
7 kilograms to be precise, which ain't just not a few kilos. It's quite a lot.
Well, I mean, I'm 7 kilograms above my ideal weight, but I think few would call me tubby. In games, he's also visibly having trouble with his knee. He drops back into midfield a bit. We aren't seeing what Ronaldo had with these kind of bullet-like runs where he's going at 100 miles an hour while swerving both ways. That was his trademark. And already in 98, you're seeing less of that. They scrape past a brilliant Denmark in the quarters, and then they play Holland, which a German friend of mine will describe as the best match in the history of the world to that point.
Are you watching at this point in Paris?
Well, I'm in the stands, but I actually, for the last 20 minutes, it's 1-1. I can't watch. I feel like if I watch, my heart will explode.
Aye.
And so I just kind of look around at the stands because it's just too stressful. This must be a common experience for football fans, right?
Yeah, I get superstitious. I think if I'm watching, we'll actually lose.
Yeah, that's stupid. But I just thought if I'm watching, then I might have a medical incident.
That's stupid as well.
The game goes to penalties. Brazil win. So they scrape past Holland. He did score a great goal in the match. Afterwards, actually, he meets Zenden in the corridors and he says to Zenden, his friend from PSV, he said, 3rd place for Holland is good, which is a very accurate insight. You know, he says his point is Brazil needs to win a World Cup, but Holland, if you finish 3rd, you've done really well. That's great.
Yeah, I guess the Dutch know their place.
Well, Ronaldo knows their place. And of course, you know, he knows most of the Dutch players. What he doesn't like about Dutch football is that people shout at each other and they tell people things they've done wrong, teammates. And in Ronaldo's moral universe, you don't do that. It's not nice.
So we've got there. Brazil, the favourites for the tournament. They've had a bit of a rough ride, but they've made it to the final. Romario is back in Brazil, cursing them. But despite that, we're still here. So this is where we get to all the drama. Join us after the break, where we get to July the 12th, 1998, the fateful evening of the World Cup final in Paris, Brazil against France. Ronaldo makes it onto the pitch, but he looks like a zombie and he barely touches the ball. What happens in the 24 hours before kickoff?
This is a reminder that you're listening to Heroes and Humans of Football with me, Simon Cooper.
And me, Mehreen Khan. Welcome back to Heroes and Humans, and this is the part of the episode where we try and finally solve what the hell happened to Ronaldo before the biggest match of his life. Now, Simon, so much of what we think may have happened on the day of the final and the subsequent afternoon before was only revealed years after the initial scandal. Tell us about how much has emerged from that night and in the weird way that the Brazilians decided to carry out a real investigation into the events of Ronaldo's mystery appearance, non-appearance in the 98 final.
Now, only in Brazil, I think, could it happen that there's a parliamentary commission of inquiry conducted in Brazil's Congress, the parliament, where committees of deputies really start investigating the national football team. And it's brilliantly written about by Alex Bellos in his book Futebol. And it's this Brazilian parliamentary inquiry, which is huge. It's about all sorts of scandals in football, but a lot of it's about the 98 World Cup final. It's a bit like the UK's current official COVID inquiry, except imagine all that kind of legal brain and parliamentary energy being spent on trying to explain why you lost a football match. It started by this communist deputy called Aldo Rebelo, and the day that the Brazilian team flew home after they lost that final, Rebelo sees a picture in a newspaper of fans waiting for the team at Rio Airport. And one of the fans in the picture is holding this banner of the Brazilian flag. And you know, on the Brazilian flag, they have the national motto, order and progress, always referred to as somewhat ironic. This fan has replaced the words order and progress on the flag with the word Nike. So he's really saying this country has sold itself to Nike.
And this flag is not an endorsement, it is a repudiation, right?
Yeah, the fan is saying Nike have bought Brazil and that's not a good thing. Now, this speaks straight to this communist deputy, Aldo Rebelo, because he doesn't like big American companies. And this picture encapsulates his own suspicions because he senses, like many Brazilians do, that Ronaldo's disaster on the day of the final has something to do with Nike. Rebelo sees Nike, to borrow a phrase, like a giant vampire squid wrapping itself around the face of the Brazilian football team. And so Rebelo thinks that this vampire squid, Nike, made their marquee player Ronaldo play in the match even though Ronaldo wasn't fit. And Rebelo says, look, this is a big deal. It's not just football. It may be that the CBF's contract with Nike violated, I quote, sovereignty, autonomy, and national identity. And those things are legally guaranteed by Brazil's constitution. So what Nike have done, he thinks, may be unconstitutional. And Rebelo does not like globalization, like many Brazilians don't. And he's pushing a bill at the same time to defend the Portuguese language from foreign and especially American English words. So to him, he tells Alex Bellos, his fight with Nike is part of this same struggle against the kind of American conquest of the world. By this time also, details of Nike's secret 1996 contract with the Brazilian Federation have leaked out. And it turns out that Nike really have gained this huge measure of control over the team because Nike, in the contract, get the rights to organize 50 friendlies for Brazil anywhere on earth. And in those friendlies, Brazil have to play at least 8 first-team regulars who are generally guys who have their own individual Nike contracts, like Ronaldo. And so it turns out that Nike has a hand both in setting the team's schedule and in team selection.
Okay, that's actually legitimately quite mad.
Yeah.
I mean, now we're obviously having a massive debate about footballers playing too many games because they need to generate earnings for their clubs. But this is insane, no?
Yeah, I mean, and that's what Brazilians think. They think Nike is this sinister paymaster of the best thing about our country, the national team. And so obviously they're behind the Ronaldo mystery in Paris. And there's kind of substantiating evidence from players. So Edmundo, who's the forward who was supposed to replace Ronaldo and then at the last minute didn't replace Ronaldo, Edmundo hints afterwards, well, they had to play Ronaldo because of the Nike contract and they had to play him for the whole 90 minutes, even though Ronaldo was obviously sleepwalking around the field.
And then Edmundo is actually forced to do a sort of public self-flagellation and say that he didn't mean what he said and it was all completely wrong. And Nike put out a statement, which, if you want to deflate a conspiracy theory about Nike having control over players, is probably not the best look. So in some senses, it does nothing to, defang this idea that Nike have something to do with it.
And, by this time, the conspiracy theories have just gone wild, like after 9/11 or the JFK assassination in the US, very similar. So there's this kind of plethora of conspiracy theories. And of course, it's an irresistible story because Alex Bellos says, look, here's the world's most famous sportsman. He's about to play the most important match of his career. Then suddenly, inexplicably, he falls ill. It's the perfect mystery. So was it stress, epilepsy? Has he been drugged?
I mean, in England, we would say he just had a dodgy pie, and that would be the end of it.
Yeah, and to be honest, an English player playing poorly in a big match is not a cause for conspiracy theories.
Yeah, it's almost what we expect at this point. It's par for the course.
Yeah, I mean, there would probably be a parliamentary investigation in the UK if an England player played brilliantly in a big match and scored a hat-trick. Yeah.
Do you know how many people are going to be throwing their headphones out of their ears, cursing at you now?
I'm just here to tell the truth. Meanwhile, there's another disaster that has hit Ronaldo. His career seems to be over because, he'd had bad knees from the start of his 20s. The night before the World Cup final, he had a physio treatment on his left knee. And then in the months after the final, he suffers a series of injuries. What you see with a player who obviously the body is wrong and he keeps coming back. And of course, he's the best player in the world, so they rush him back early. And then there's this climax. I watched it on YouTube this week. There's this terrible collapse of his right knee. He's playing for Inter against Lazio in 2000, and he's running at the Lazio defense. It looks like, kind of classic Ronaldo, old Ronaldo. He's doing this power run. The defenders are visibly terrified. And then he does a swerve, and when he swerves, his right knee collapses.
Ooh.
And it looks gruesome. And the Lazio defenders switch in an instant from viewing Ronaldo with terror to terrified look in their eyes because they think the guy's gone. He's not going to play football again. And they're waving for a stretcher and he's stretchered off.
And in a couple of months afterwards, when he gets better, you see that he has like a visible limp, which is so jarring to see on a young man that he has his legs kind of protruded out and he just can't walk straight.
And at this point, he's only 23 years old. And it is a turning point. He will never be the old, complete Ronaldo again. And my Financial Times colleague, John Byrne-Murdoch, our data whiz, has shown that the young Ronaldo was the highest scoring young player in history. So up to about the age of 21, 22, he's better than Messi and Ronaldo at the same age. He's better than Haaland. He's better than Mbappe. But already then, whereas these other guys, they remain perfect, partly because kicking has been kind of pushed out of football. But his perfect striker's body has already been destroyed. So at this point, while the Parliamentary Commission is inquiring, it seems that all the people who wanted a piece of this boy have destroyed him, that the world's best player has been destroyed by rapacious commercialism. And so he disappears from stage for a few years after 98. He's not playing hardly at all. Most of the world forgets about R9 and his final, but Brazilians continue to obsess about it.
So let's get into the details of the Nike saga. So how exactly are Nike supposed to have had a direct hand in the events just before the 98 final?
Well, Nike are only one of the scapegoats. They are the perfect scapegoat because they are this big American company. And so the idea is, well, Ronaldo is their marquee player. He's their kind of, I guess today the equivalent would be someone like LeBron James. He's their poster boy. The World Cup final, he has to play. And the idea is Ronaldo's not fit. Something has happened before the game. The doctors have said he can't play. And then Nike say, no, he has to play. And so the idea is Nike make him play. That's perhaps the most common conspiracy theory. But he's not fit, so he has a terrible game. And he can't be substituted because he's the poster boy. And so Brazil lose 3-0.
And so ex post, I guess this conspiracy theory has also taken legs because when you watch the final and obviously Brazil lose in humiliating circumstances, Ronaldo takes his boots. So they are the R9 mercurials, which have been designed specifically for the final. So they're blue and yellow. And he hangs them around his neck like a necklace. So he's wearing the boots front and center. So lots of the images that you see of that final afterwards is Ronaldo, the advertising board for Nike. Like if it couldn't have been more obvious that he's a Nike athlete and he has to show it, wearing your boots around your neck is one way to do it. So I think all of the events that happen after the game have also added and thrown fuel onto the fire of how Nike was involved, which is why this is such a beautiful conspiracy theory, because now you can see signs of it absolutely everywhere, including the boots, including the advertising campaigns, and including wearing your boots around your neck like a piece of jewelry.
But there are other conspiracy theories as well. So the most popular is Nike, but other people say, well, maybe it was another hidden force. Maybe FIFA drugged him. Maybe the French drugged him. Maybe the Brazilian players threw the game. This is also a conspiracy that goes about in Brazil. And the idea is Brazil were offered $23 million and various other incentives. Like Brazil were going to be chosen as host of the 2006 World Cup if they agree to lose the final. And then the story goes, Ronaldo refused to go along with the plan. He says, no, I'm going to play my best in the final. And they say, okay, we'll drop you from the team. So that's why the first team sheet doesn't have his name on it. But then Ronaldo relents at the last moment. Nike say, well, withdraw your sponsorship deal unless you play and agree to lose. And so he comes back, they put him on the team sheets at the last minute and Brazil lose.
Right. I'm just going to say, is any of this have any foundation beyond just being concocted as a idea that something could have happened?
You're not a conspiracy theorist, are you?
I am definitely a conspiracy theorist, but I need them to be good so I can, talk about them in more animated terms, because this one sounds a bit off.
Yeah, I don't think Brazil sold the game. I mean, one flaw in the theory is that Brazil did not get to host the 2006 World Cup.
Some of the other things that have been added onto this particular conspiracy boat is that if they throw the final, they'll get an easier round in the next World Cup in 2002.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like you throw a World Cup final to get an easier run to the next World Cup final. Why not just win this World Cup final?
And so that's kind of proven because they get super easy group stages in Korea and Japan. But again, I'm like, that's pretty weak.
Yeah, but the thing is that what adds some plausibility to the idea that the Brazilian federation or the team through the final is that people understand that the guy at the top of the CBF, the federation, Ricardo Teixeira, is very dubious. So they can sort of imagine, and of course, bad things have happened before in Brazilian football, they could imagine that the final was sold.
Yeah. I mean, just to give this one its due, there's a bizarre moment in the match where second half, Brazil already down 2-0, and Rivaldo's sort of got the ball he's just got the ball in the middle of the field, and like there's a little stoppage in play. Instead of ignoring it, he kicks the ball out. And people are like, they're throwing the game, this is match fixing. And it doesn't make a huge amount of sense because I think he was just a bit of sportsmanship on his part. And the other part that really, gets me is like, and I forget this about the final, was that France actually go down to 10 men. So Desailly gets sent off. Yeah. And if there is this conspiracy to make sure that Brazil lose or the French are also in on it, it doesn't really hold together, does it?
No. What happens? Well, the Parliamentary inquiry is going to find out. And it calls loads of witnesses, because that's a great thing about being a parliamentary inquiry. You can get anyone to come. So they make Brazil's coach Mario Zagallo testify, other players, the team doctor, and eventually even Ronaldo himself comes to Parliament in Brasilia to testify. And some of the inquiry is just ludicrous because the deputies behave like fans or sports journalists. And they ask the players about tactics, and then there's, autograph requests. It doesn't really cast Brazil's politicians, much maligned for other reasons, in their best possible light, I have to say. But nonetheless, if you put all these witness testimonies together, you do get an account emerging from that day, which is nicely summed up by, let's say, a composite of Alex Bellos and Fernando Duarte in their books.
Let's get into it. So we're a few hours before kickoff. It's the afternoon of the final. And this is a sort of mishmash of all the testimonies and recollections of what people have said happened on the day. Simon, let's go through it.
So they have lunch at the Château de Grande Romaine in La Signy near Paris, which is pretty good, right? Ronaldo has a plate of steak, salad, mashed potato, rice, and beans. I'm sure this would not be a pre-match meal in 2024, but it is in 98. Because there's a legal requirement that rice and beans have to be part of any Brazilian meal. So they have lunch, and, Ronaldo likes lunch. Then they go back to their rooms, which they're sharing in twos. So Ronaldo's sharing with Roberto Carlos, and next door is Edmundo and Doriva. So Ronaldo goes to sleep, which, what you're supposed to do. And Roberto Carlos, his roommate, is watching telly. And suddenly, while Ronaldo's asleep, he starts to have this fit. And his whole body convulses. He pulls faces, he froths at the mouth, and he begins to shake uncontrollably. This is what emerges in the testimony before the Parliamentary Committee. I guess before the players had, as players do, kept all this stuff secret. But now they tell Parliament he was having this fit while he's asleep. And Roberto Carlos obviously panics and he starts screaming for help. And he shouts to next door, Edmundo Doriva, Ronaldo is feeling unwell. And so Edmundo comes in and he tells Congress, look, it was just this desperate scene. Roberto Carlos, in this panic, is running through the hotel, hitting on all the doors, shouting for everyone to come. And Edmundo says, Ronaldo's asleep, but he's hitting out. He's lying down and he's hitting himself with his hands. His teeth are locked together and his mouth is foaming. It sounds like it's in a scene in a horror movie.
It sounds like an exorcism.
Yeah, and, you can imagine these 20-something players, never seen anything like this. Day of the World Cup final. You couldn't imagine anything more scary, and it's your best player. So how can this happen at a healthy 21-year-old? What's going on? The only guy who knows what to do, because it takes a while for the doctors to arrive, is the defender Cesar Sampaio, because Sampaio's dad is an epileptic, so he is familiar with what to do when somebody is having a fit. And Sampaio arrives in the room, and he says, look, we have to make sure he doesn't swallow his tongue. So he says, Edmundo, hold down Ronaldo, and Sampaio puts his hand in Ronaldo's mouth and he unravels his tongue so that Ronaldo can't swallow it. So at this point, Ronaldo's tongue has been unraveled and he goes back to sleep. And I guess the fit ends. And the team doctors have arrived and all the players are standing around their star player who's had this fit. And the doctors say, look, we've got a big game. Ronaldo's going to wake up. He's not going to know what happened. So we're not going to tell him anything until the time of the game. The doctors say, you guys all go back to your rooms and rest. But everyone is too worried to rest. So every 5 minutes, somebody comes up and stares at Ronaldo, who's lying there sleeping like a baby, says Edmundo. The other players are thinking, what happened? And everybody is shaken up, except Ronaldo, because he doesn't know what happened when he wakes up after this 3-hour nap. He says he feels a bit stiff, but, goes off and has a shower. And then he goes for the pre-match meal. I guess they have an early supper. But he's quiet at table. He doesn't speak to anyone and he's not eating. And with Ronaldo, when he's not eating, you know that something is very badly wrong.
He's like you.
Yeah. If I did not eat the pre-match meal, then that would be cause for alarm. And Ronaldo's a jokester, this kind of messing around with Zenden that he did and trying to have judo fights. That's kind of Ronaldo. But he's very quiet. And Leonardo is a senior player who will actually later become, technical director at PSG, to complete your conspiracy theory. Leonardo's he's a mature guy and he's very distressed. And he says, look, we have to tell him what happened. It's not ethical that everyone in the team knows that he had a fit. And he doesn't. And we also have to send him for tests, says Leonardo. And Leonardo goes up to Ronaldo, who still knows nothing. And Leonardo says, look, kid, there are more important things than football. And Ronaldo thinks, why are you telling me this? What's the point of this whole thing? And then the doctors say, look, Ronaldo, you had a fit while you were asleep. And this is a shock to Ronaldo. And the doctors say, we're going to take you for medical tests.
So Ronaldo, 21 years old, the joker of the team, is kind of in a state of denial. Because this has never happened to him before. He's had big games in the past. He does really well at domestic level. But the idea that he is even prone to fits or this is an underlying medical condition, it's not on the radar of any of his teammates and also not on the doctors. The doctors tell him, look, we understand that you think you're okay and we think you're okay too, but let's just go through the procedures so there's no kind of negligence on their part and then you can go and play the final in the evening. And I think the doctor at the time does say that he was very much aware of the fact that if Ronaldo can't play in the World Cup final, he's going to be to blame. So there's almost like a conspiracy among the medical professionals to make sure that they've done all their checks so he can play the game.
Yeah, so the squad, everyone else except Ronaldo, takes the bus to the Stade de France. And normally the Brazilians are playing drums and tambourines on the bus, but this time, deadly silence. They're without their best player, in the bus at least. And meanwhile, Ronaldo goes to the Lila clinic in Paris because Brazil have achieved this incredible miracle that on a Sunday in summer, they have found French doctors working who are willing to do checks on Ronaldo. This has never happened before in the history of post-war France. So they take him to the Lila clinic, and meanwhile, Brazil have to issue their lineup because FIFA, rules, you have to issue it a couple of hours before kickoff. And so they print this lineup without Ronaldo in it. And Zagallo, the coach, has to give a team talk. Now, Zagallo is kind of a fixture in Brazilian football history. He's been present as either a player or a manager at all the 4 World Cups that Brazil had won to this point. And so he gives a pre-match team talk. And he says, look, guys, okay, our best player isn't here. But I remember when I was a player, we won the World Cup 1962, even after Pelé dropped injured, so it'll be fine this time as well. Nobody buys it. And meanwhile, Ronaldo is going through all these tests at the Lila clinic. And the French doctors say, we can't find anything wrong with him. He seems fine. They say he can play, but we just ask that he does not score against France, please.
Given that this is a conspiracy episode, you have to say that's a joke because it might just become a new conspiracy that you've created.
Well, the French doctors say it as a joke, but who knows how it was really intended.
I mean, everyone knows that French people have no sense of humour, so they can't joke anyway, even if they wanted to.
I am a French person myself. I naturalised in 2022. I'm French and British.
That's why you became less funny, bud.
The Brazilian doctors will later say, look, there is no evidence from these tests that anything was wrong with Ronaldo. And whatever happened to him, it was an amazing random one-off that was unique in the history of medicine, one of the doctors says. What is true is that Ronaldo will never have another convulsion for the rest of his career. This just doesn't happen again. So it's this complete one-off only before the biggest match that he's ever played. So the clinic has said, you're fine to play. So 40 minutes before kickoff, he shows up in the changing room in full kit, even wearing these silver Nike boots. And he shows up and he says, guys, I'm fine. I can play. And Zagallo says later to the Parliamentary Commission, he says, look, the best player in the world comes and says, I'm fine to play. And of course I picked him because, if Ronaldo says I'm fine and I don't pick him, then everyone's going to blame me, Zagallo, for, what a lunatic leaving out the world's best player. They go onto the field without warming up, as we've said. And some of the Brazilian players are terrified for Ronaldo because they've watched him have this fit. And they think, is it safe for him to play? Is he going to collapse? Might he even die on the field? You can imagine that fear for someone who's also a friend. He's a lovely guy. Everybody likes him. And at half-time, Ronaldo's been walking around like a zombie on the field for 45 minutes. And Zagallo says to him in the changing room, how are you feeling? And Ronaldo says, Zagallo, don't worry. I'm feeling fine. And so Zagallo feels, well, I can't take off the world's best player. And Lidio Toledo, the team doctor, says, imagine if I stopped him playing and Brazil lost. At that moment, I'd have to go and live on the North Pole, which is probably correct. Now, we come to the Nike issue, right? And every witness to the Parliamentary Commission says Nike had nothing to do with the decision to play Ronaldo. They just weren't consulted in this whole crazy afternoon that we had. And R9 tells the committee about Nike, he says the only thing they ever asked me to do was wear their boots during games. I actually had lunch in Rio in 99, so a year or less than a year after the final with the Nike rep, a guy called Ostrovsky. And I put the conspiracy theory to him, like, did Nike force Ronaldo to play? Ostrovsky said, look, he was very contemptuous about this. And he'd obviously heard this question a million times. He said, look, the interest of Nike is that Brazil win the World Cup and that's what we care about. That would be great for Nike. That would be good for our share price. So why would we want to do anything that would sabotage Brazil winning the World Cup? He says just on the face of it, as a conspiracy theory, it doesn't make sense, which I'm inclined to believe is true. And to back that up, the inquiry, many of the deputies are desperate to pin the blame on Nike, and they can't. They can't find any evidence.
I guess this conspiracy would have a lot of its wind taken out of it. All of them would, if he was taken off at halftime.
That might make it even weirder. Then you get, so imagine Ronaldo's taken off at half time, Brazil lose 2 or 3-0,
But when you have a 21-year-old who's playing really badly and it's clear that he's just not himself, but you tried, he said he felt fine, but as a manager, you decide you've got a duty of care of him, you take him off.
Yeah, but he's the best player.
But he wasn't playing like their best player and he didn't look like their best player. And I guess it wasn't like he was going to do a Kylian Mbappe in 2022 and come back in the second half and single-handedly drag them through.
Well, who knows?
There were no signs that could have happened.
Yeah, maybe, but, Messi has played some very bad halves or halves where you didn't see him at all and nobody thought about taking him off. But, we're kind of indulging in the conspiracy theories, and the person who has least time for them in the whole inquiry is Ronaldo himself.
Indeed.
So he comes to testify in this very smart suit because, of course, Ronaldo really likes buying clothes. And the deputies are starstruck. And one deputy says, Mr. Ronaldo, very humbly, you're a great man, etc. Why do you think Brazil did not beat France? Which is, when you think about it, it's a crazy question to be asking in Parliament years after the game. And R9 thinks, what is this? And he just erupts. And he says, why didn't we win? Because we let in 3 goals, because we lost. He says, because I don't know. He says, in sport, you win and you lose. How many times has Brazil won? And he says, and no one asked why, or a few people asked why we won. But in sport, you win, you lose. This time we lost. Be patient. And then he says, just because we lost, are we going to invent a bunch of mysteries? Which he kind of puts his finger on it, because that's exactly what they're doing. So, the parliamentary inquiry doesn't get anywhere in kind of showing that Nike are the bad guys, but they do force Nike and the CBF to rewrite their contract. So no longer does Nike have this grip on the team's massive friendly schedule, playing these pointless matches all over the world, and no longer does Nike have a say in who plays in those games.
So some good does actually come of it.
Yeah, I suppose the pressure to rewrite the contract is helpful. There's also a lot of accusations against Ricardo Teixeira. The committee accuse him of 13 different crimes. Those crimes do not include, by the way, selling or throwing the World Cup final. And, of course, nothing is ever done against him. There's a 686-page report at the end of inquiry. It accuses 33 people of committing crimes, but none of those crimes have anything to do with the final. So it turns out from the inquiry that Brazilian football is very corrupt, but not the World Cup final.
And Nike, let's be honest, we shouldn't victimize them too much. They're doing pretty fine after this little event. That's partly because Brazil go on to win another World Cup in 2002. They become a dominant sports brand. I think their share price may have maybe had a couple of rough weeks, but nothing too awful happened. So we've exhausted the Nike conspiracy theory, and actually there is no real smoking gun there.
There's no smoking gun at all.
So this leaves us with, I guess, the more plausible versions of events, Simon. So what really happened, and what do we think really happened on that day?
Yeah, what's the Sherlock Holmes line? When all other theories have been excluded, then what remains, however implausible, must be true, which is obviously nonsense because it's always impossible to exclude all other possible theories, but Arthur Conan Doyle was not a great logician. But anyway, we've excluded some theories. So what did happen that day?
Yeah, I guess Karl Popper would call this an exercise in falsification.
Yes, probably.
Which is how we come to the truth. So we're basically trying to debunk everything until there's something that we just can't debunk anymore. So let's have at it.
Well, there are a couple of plausible theories that remain. So I think the most plausible I heard, and the simplest, and the theory that the simplest theory is often correct. My friend Philippe, who was a doctor who became a CEO, says, when you have a panic attack, you're very tired afterwards. And he says, a lot of people have panic attacks. It's not weird to have a panic attack just a few hours before you're playing the World Cup final. So he says probably Ronaldo had a panic attack, and afterwards he walks around very tired, like you are, with a panic attack. Now there's a theory that links into this, which is that Fernando Duarte says neither the Brazilian nor the French doctors looked into or maybe knew about Ronaldo's history of sleepwalking as a child. Now, his family, said, he used to sleepwalk. Somnambulism, sleepwalking, is from the same sort of medical family as night terrors. So night terrors are you're asleep and you are triggered into a terror by a situation of stress, which might be, for example, your nation is relying on you to win a World Cup when you have a bad knee. So he had a panic attack, a night terror, and this somnambulism explanation does actually overlap with one of the Brazilian conspiracy theories, which is that Ronaldo had a hidden medical condition. So in this solution, his medical condition is he has night terrors, he's a sleepwalker, and that's what happened when he had the nap on the day of the final. And then afterwards, he was exhausted.
But there's no conspiracy in that it was secret because he hid it from the world. It was secret because he just didn't realize the extent of what he was suffering from.
No, and he didn't realize that it was important to say, oh, by the way, as a child, I often sleepwalked. And if he'd said that, then maybe somebody would have said, you know how when you're with a doctor and you mention some medical antecedent that you haven't thought of before, and the doctor said, oh, well, that's probably it. It just doesn't come up that he's a sleepwalker or he used to be a sleepwalker. And so nobody hits upon the night terror panic attack explanation, which seems to me very plausible. There's another theory that comes out years later. Brazilian newspapers say, look, in those days it was quite common for Brazilian players to have injections of all sorts of drugs that were legal. And so they say 10 minutes before he has this fit, he had an injection of an anesthetic to help his bad knee. And accidentally the drug entered a vein and it caused that fit that he had. Now, I don't think that's right. Brazilian doctors have always denied this, but then they would say that, wouldn't they? And apparently it's medically not very probable.
It would also just show up on a blood test.
Yeah, because he was tested at the Lila Clinic, but then maybe at the clinic they said, oh, well, he has an anesthetic injected into his vein, and the Brazilian doctors think, oops, well, we'd better not say that because it will make us look incompetent. So it's possible. I think the panic attack night terror explanation is the most plausible. The simplest theory, no conspiracy, that I think is what happened.
One of the favorite theories that I've heard, which you can actually disprove right now on this podcast because you were there, and you mentioned that you had a mobile phone for the first time ever in your life.
But it didn't have internet.
It didn't have internet, but did you have phone signal? Because one of the subsequent exposed theories that have been around is that there was something dodgy going on that day because all the journalists in the stadium lost their phone signal. So they weren't able to communicate back to their editors or their desks back wherever they were about what was going on with Ronaldo. Is that true, Simon?
Well, I never communicated with my desk anyway, so I wouldn't know. I mean, I wasn't used to carrying a phone. By mid-July 1998, I'd had a phone for about a month. So it just wasn't a thing that you did, that you looked at your phone and,
Call someone.
No.
That you're still like that today, to be honest.
Is it true? Yeah. Yeah. I'm probably the worst person to ask about, were you able to call the desk? Because, why would I?
A second conspiracy theory that I really like is that he was cheating on his famous Brazilian girlfriend, Susana Werner, and she finds out a couple of months before the World Cup's about to start. So they're having stand-up rows. His mental health is all over the place. Ronaldo reportedly is like throwing chairs at walls. They're having huge fights. And generally his state of mind is so bad that that's what sort of led him to implode before the World Cup final. Again, I'm clutching at straws.
Well, I mean, that's linked to the panic attack, night terror. You're playing a World Cup final. Your relationship is going badly wrong. It's all very stressful.
Yeah, give me Cruyff kind of vibes. Got caught cheating just before the final. Completely ruined his personal life. Can't get it back on track.
Listen to our Cruyff episode about the 1974 final, which now I think about is oddly similar because Cruyff has this brilliant run in the first minute, Holland get a penalty, but after that he plays a lot like Ronaldo in 1998. He's a kind of sleepwalker on the field.
And for him, he does have a woman problem. So maybe it's a woman problem. But a lot of these things that I'm relaying to you now come about subsequently because at the end of the 90s and the early 2000s, it is the dawn of the internet. And so there are people and hoaxers on the internet that are actually actively pushing so many of these theories. And so we know subsequently that journalists, particularly some at The Guardian, were falling for some of these hoaxes and then having to disprove them. So that's kind of still why in 2024 there's so many straws that you can clutch at, because this episode also coincides with the birth of the internet and of trolling, of hoax journalism, of people putting stuff out on websites and it kind of going viral in the small environment of what people were doing in the late 90s, which is reading websites where they could encounter all this kind of mad information. So I think that's also why this particular period in history is really sort of surrounded by so much mystery, because so many people were using this as an episode to spread hoaxes. And because we didn't understand what was real and what was not on the internet, so many people ended up falling for them too.
Well, soon afterwards, the 9/11 attacks in the US will engender similar conspiracy theories that lots of people think it was done by the US government.
Yeah, we're kind of like, 9/11, moon landings, Ronaldo and the World Cup. Subsequently now, of course, we're living with this reality all the time, the pandemic being, the biggest explosion of people's mistrust in what's happening in society and among their institutions. So this is when football really becomes part of hoax culture and conspiracy theory culture with this final.
I'd say it's very largely a Brazilian thing because most people in the world don't really care anymore about the World Cup final. They don't think about it much, but Brazilians do not stop thinking about it.
Indeed.
So we come to the aftermath, the rest of his career. And for 4 years, he sort of disappears, 1998 to 2002. He plays very little. He joins Real Madrid. He's lost some of his explosivity, and he knows that he can't play every match. And he's had to remake himself because the young Ronaldo had this second acceleration. He'd be sprinting at top pace, and then he'd accelerate. And defenders would think that it was like seeing a ghost. He'd be gone. And meanwhile, other players are building up their muscles, so he's no longer got the sort of kind of strongest body in football. And he knows, he's only in his mid-20s, but he has to choose his moments. And his priority, obviously, is the World Cup, because he has to make up for the catastrophe of 1998. So he nurses himself for years, and he takes himself to the World Cup 2002 in Japan, Korea. And this is his perfect World Cup. He scores 8 goals, he scores 2 in the final, and Brazil win. And he's a kind of new Ronaldo at this point. I mean, what I wrote at the time is that he'd become a master of nanotechnology because defenses had got tighter, strikers might have just a couple of inches of space, and he just needed a couple of inches. So he's become a nanotechnologist from having been a monster. So Ronaldo is so great that he was two great players at different points in his career.
And Simon, after being in Paris for the 98 final, your first, you're also in Japan to watch Ronaldo triumph in Yokohama. What do you remember from that day?
Well, Ronaldo was the story because he'd scored the 2 goals and I was writing the kind of piece about the man. Somebody else was writing the match report. So his other teammates are running around like madmen, wrapped in Brazilian flags, and they're giving thanks to an evangelical God because by this point, a lot of the Brazilian players have become evangelical Christians. And Ronaldo, I don't think he ever did Christianity. He just stays completely calm and he hugs the German striker Bierhoff. He goes and has a consoling chat with the German coach Rudi Völler. And most of the Germans are kind of lying slumped in the grass, defeated, gutted. And he goes and he speaks a few words of consolation to each of them. He congratulates the referee, Golina. And I thought what he's doing is he's aiming for perfect tranquility. This is his life's goal. He senses he's not going to be at his best for another World Cup. He's 25, but his body is shot. He's going to win the World Cup once, and he is going to experience it with a very clear head. And he has the advantage of this is his second World Cup final, so he knows how you're supposed to experience it. This is what sports people sometimes talk about, that the first time it goes by in a rush, and the second time you can savor. And so he's savoring. And then we go to the press conference, and this Brazilian journalist grabs the microphone, and he starts lecturing Ronaldo, who's giving the press conference. And this Brazilian guy says, we're not interested in the past. We don't care about this World Cup final that you've just won. We only care about the future. You got to win us an Olympic gold. You got to win us the next World Cup. And it's a very weird kind of attack on Ronaldo. Like, you've won the World Cup, but that's not enough. And Ronaldo is very calm. And he says, I don't want to feel any pressure now about the future. I don't want to think. I don't want anything except to celebrate. Thank you very much. So what I saw was this guy who, after a lot of bad things, had learned to fend off all the vultures who wanted a piece of him. He is going to run his own career, and he's not going to let everybody use him and destroy his body anymore.
And he's also, I guess now we're kind of thinking about it, he's the wrong guy to center a conspiracy theory around because he himself doesn't indulge any conspiracy theories. So I'm thinking about counterfactual. Say this was Maradona. Now, Maradona will be leaning into this, right? He spent most of his years basically pointing and planting little seeds across the media to show that there was something was done to him. And there were wider shadowy forces at work.
Yeah, that's what Maradona did after the 1990 World Cup.
That's what he did anyway. Exactly. Yeah. Even when there was no obvious conspiracy. Well, there was in 94 potentially, but he just got caught for doing something he shouldn't have been doing. And
but
so
in 1990, he said, FIFA didn't want me to win the World Cup, and there was this massive conspiracy.
And in 94, that he couldn't win it because there was no way that the friend of Castro could win a World Cup in neoliberal United States. There's so much around Maradona. And I guess Ronaldo it's quite jarring that he's just not somebody that would ever want any of this kind of stuff surrounding him. And he's done nothing in his career but actually try and deflate all of the stuff that we've just been speaking about, because he just says, look, basically his attitude is shit happens and we won a World Cup. So I'm cool.
Yeah, and even if he hadn't won the World Cup again, he still would have been very level-headed about it. He'd been like, yeah, we lost the football match, it happens. Get over it. And then he achieves his coronation in 2002. 98 was meant to be his coronation, but he gets it in 2002 at 25, and he wins the Ballon d'Or that year. And that's mostly it for his career, because his body is shot. He has a few cameos. He has a couple of good seasons at Real Madrid. But really, the World Cup 2002 is the last peak of his career.
There is a scandal that we haven't mentioned, which I don't think is mentioned enough, which is that he wins the World Cup with the worst haircut I've ever seen on any player ever.
Yeah.
Right. So if Nike were really pulling the strings, they must have told him, dude, shave your head, but just leave a bit of fluff at the front. Yeah. And then all the 11-year-old boys at my school in Peterborough had that bloody thing on their head. Honestly, it's outrageous. Outrageous behavior.
Yeah, I don't think Nike were behind that.
I don't know who was. Maybe what's-her-face, Werner was taking her revenge on him.
Yeah, she'd say you'd look really nice if you just,
Yeah, but the summer of 2002, I guess anywhere in any urban developed city in Europe, you saw boys with that horrendous fluff haircut. It was just awful. It was like a mustache on the top of your head.
Speaking of the next generation, he has a son, and he names his son Ronald, which is funny on the face of it, given that he's called Ronaldo.
That's cute.
but he doesn't name his son Ronald after himself. So it's not like Cristiano Ronaldo Jr., who's named after Cristiano Ronaldo Sr. Do you know why he calls his son Ronald?
Oh, was it something to do with the doctor that cut his umbilical cord? No?
This time it's because Ronaldo and his then wife liked eating at McDonald's.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so they thought Ronald McDonald's,
Oh, no.
Ronald Ronaldo, what could be better? And, this is also a hint that his lifestyle is not really compatible with top-class football. So he gets really quite fat.
Yeah. I guess with all the McDonald's, he could end up joining Trump's new cabinet, huh?
Yeah.
Posing with the fries on the private jet.
That joy may be yet to come. He does play one more World Cup, 2006, aged only 29. He looks really done. He looks like a 45-year-old man. And he's in a very lazy Brazil team that is knocked out by France in the quarterfinals. But this time, nobody in Brazil spins any conspiracies. Everybody says you're just a bunch of useless, lazy losers, which is correct. They're brilliant footballers, Kaká, Ronaldinho, Ronaldo. I think Adriano's there a bit. They kind of look like a veterans team. Now, there's one final flourish, which comes in the life of every great footballer, which is that there are rumours that he is going to join Manchester City, 2008, which I think they're owned by that Thai oligarch, Thaksin. Yeah.
Thaksin is at Manchester City, who now got all the money in the world, so they need Brazilians.
Yeah, this is when they sign Robinho, and Robinho thinks he's signing for Manchester United.
Yeah, and it doesn't go that well for Robinho.
It doesn't go well for Ronaldo either, because he's just past the point where even Thaksin could plausibly sign him. Because around this time, the Brazilian magazine Veja photographs him sprawling pot-bellied on a yacht, smoking and drinking beer. And it's like, this is over. This is really, you're done. And 15 or so years on, he's the not very committed president of Valladolid. He's not very popular with their fans. I think they've been relegated a couple of times. And I think Valladolid is not the place. It's a provincial town in Spain where he spends most of his time.
Quite an odd choice for him. I feel like he's maybe doing it as a favour for a friend or something, because it doesn't seem like the kind of chairman type.
I think some investors said, we'll buy the club, you be the chairman, it's all going to work out brilliantly. And he kind of went along with it. And then as time went on, he saw less and less reason to spend time in Valladolid. But, I think he quite enjoys life. He likes eating, he likes sex, and he's quite relaxed. So I think he's good. Yeah,
grown his hair out, the teeth are back in their rightful place. I kind of respect it that he's sort of gone away. And there is that whole generation of players, I'm thinking like Samir Nasri, Wesley Sneijder. They're just super little fatties, aren't they? And they sort of come back for testimonials every now and then, and they've still got amazing skill, but people take the piss out of them because of how much weight that they've put on. But I'm just kind of like, you know what? It's clearly, I sort of respect the fact they don't really care anymore. And they're living life on their own terms. So they're not celebrities in any sense. They don't go on TV. Football's just something that they come back to now and then, but otherwise they're out of public view. So we're coming to the end of the episode. And we've done our very best. Simon, you definitely have, being very hard-nosed as you are as a journalist, to defang so many of these conspiracy theories, which leaves us with a version of the truth. So we've solved the mystery. The guy had a panic attack, right? That's it.
Yeah, panic attack or night terror, I think they're probably not totally different phenomena. Speaking as a doctor, of course.
But we shouldn't just dismiss this episode of just a period of hysteria or people going mad because Brazilians were just so upset at losing a World Cup. I mean, as we've already hinted at, there's something else going on about this moral panic, about money in football, about brands, about commercialization, about what we now call the global South's relationship to capitalism, how there's always this kind of underlying suspicion that these companies and these brands are exploiting people of the global South, and in this case, Ronaldo and the Brazilian football team. And we've also proven that actually that was also true. There was a lot of malfeasance going on the part of Nike, who sort of had an iron grip on the Brazilian football team in a way that I wouldn't accept for my football team, or if I was an England fan, how they would behave with England. So in some senses, some good did come out of this whole rigmarole of a committee hearing and parliamentarians getting involved.
And we have the same anxieties today about players being overused, how their bodies aren't standing up to the demands that are being made of them, how they have to play all the time for the money men. And 25 years ago, the victim was seen to be Ronaldo, and now, a bit less spectacularly, it's Rodrigo.
The Man City midfielder who just before, weeks after complaining about how much he was playing, suffered what looked like a really serious cruciate injury and is going to be out for the rest of the season.
And I think, looking back, the person who comes out of the story best, who handled the whole hysteria best, was R9, was Ronaldo. He remained level-headed. He doesn't like to talk about the final anymore, but one of the last times he did, in 2011, he said, I am tired of talking about what happened. There's no use in constantly revisiting that day. But look, I was very young in 98 and the pressure on me was immense. I don't remember what happened that day. And if the doctors couldn't find a definite explanation, what am I going to say? And then he says, people forget. France played well. They had the crowd behind them. They scored 2 goals in the first half. He's like, let it go, people.
Okay, so let's sum up with our traditional questions. And the first one to you, Simon. What would Ronaldo R9 be doing if he had not been a footballer? I guess we kind of know because he's not been a footballer for a really long time. But what do you think?
Well, if he hadn't made loads of money from football and was able to kind of, smoke cigars on yachts, what would he have done? My theory is he'd be a security guard, which is a very common profession in Brazil, or some other lowly figure at the bottom of Rio society where he could use really the only resource he had, which is that incredible, muscular, yet agile body.
You don't think that his incredible libido may have sent him into darker paths somewhere?
How could he have made a living out of his libido?
I mean, OnlyFans. I mean, there's a lot of things. I feel like I shouldn't be explaining this to you because it's like telling my dad about what OnlyFans is. But if you know, you know. He could have been a minor porn star. Who knows?
Yeah, you reckon?
Or a super successful one. I don't know what the Brazilian scene's like, but we did mention Playboy at the top, so.
Yeah. Although that was his girlfriends, the Ronaldos.
You never know.
Okay.
With that being said, would we like to hang out with him? Porn star or no porn star?
I see him as a lovely, sane guy in an insane world. I'm not sure we would have long conversations. I don't think he would want that, but I'd like to have lunch with him. I think we would both enjoy a good lunch.
I think you should do lunch with the FT in McDonald's. There you go.
Thank you for listening to Heroes and Humans of Football. For more information, go to our website at heroesandhumans.com.
And follow us at Heroes and Humans on all social platforms. This show was developed by Immaterial and produced by One Fine Play. Matt Cheney is the series producer. Kazra Firuzia is the editor and producer. We have been your hosts, Mehreen Khan
and Simon Cooper.
And this has been Heroes and Humans of Football.